This public hearing of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee to order, and I want to thank all of the members and testifiers who could join us today. Today's hearing is the final part in our series of hearings on how Pennsylvania can best deploy 5G wireless technology. And as I stated at our last hearing, expanding access to 5G is just one of the many ways Pennsylvania can address improving access to high-speed internet to communities all across the state. 5G legislation would be on a parallel track with broadband deployment legislation. They are both needed in order to bring Pennsylvania to where it needs to be to maintain a competitive environment for businesses and people to work and live. Today's discussion continues where we left off 2 weeks ago when we heard from the wireless carriers and the local municipalities. With that being said, I would like to turn it over to Chairman Kane for his opening remarks. Chairman Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for holding this meeting. I also would like to thank our testifiers today. 2 weeks ago, we held the first part of this hearing on expanding 5G and small cell infrastructure. I asked several of the panelists about expanding equity in our broadband system and making sure our technological expansions are serving underserved communities. That means deploying broadband and 5G to new areas, but it also means ensuring that the folks working on our broadband systems are paid good, family-sustaining wages, and given good benefits. I'm looking forward to hearing testimony today from representatives from the CWA and the IBEW about how we can make sure any expansion of broadband and 5G is supporting our union workers. As I said when we started our first hearing on the topic of expanding 5G has the potential to be good for our local governments, good for our communities, and good for our workers. But we have to make sure we do it right. This hearing will help us make sure that any 5G or broadband expansion doesn't leave anyone behind. I want to thank all of our testifiers again for being here today, and I look forward to working with you moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Kane. And I want to welcome our first panel of labor organizations. Mr. Ed Mooney, International Vice President, Communication Workers of America, District 2-13, AFL-CIO, and Mr. Chris Anderson, International Representative, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, 3rd District. Welcome, and please begin when you are ready. The members of the committee will ask questions at the conclusion of your panel.
So, Madam Chairwoman, this is Edward Mooney from CWA. Would you like me to read the testimony that I provided to you guys?
You certainly are welcome to summarize the prepared remarks that you shared with the committee. All of the members have received the testimony that you've provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So, good morning, Chair Phillips, Senator Kane, and members of the Senate Communications and Technologies Committee. My name is Ed Mooney. I'm the International Vice President for the CWA. We have been working with the state legislature for several years now on the issue of 5G deployment throughout the state of Pennsylvania. In numerous meetings over the last several years, we have worked with Senator Brown as well as representatives in the House to make sure that when we were deploying the expansion of 5G across the Commonwealth, as Senator Kane just mentioned, we did not leave the workers in this industry behind. Telecommunications industry throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for decades now has provided the highest quality jobs available to our residents and your constituents, myself included. I am a 33-year employee. I actually retired a few years ago from Verizon Communications. And we want to make sure as we deploy these jobs throughout the Commonwealth with this new technology that, number one, we're doing it safely. Number two, we're doing it with the community in mind. We have always, as we build out this network over the decades, we have made sure that the community interests were at the forefront of what we were doing in this industry. We need to make sure now, as more and more entrants come into this industry, that we do not throw the community's interest and the business interest of expanding this stuff in the wastebasket in the interest of the providers who are now trying to enter the market. We've all seen what the pandemic has done to businesses and employees over the last year or so. We in the CWA and the IBEW have been telling the legislature for about a decade now, while not predicting a pandemic, we have been identifying the flaws in the deployment of the telecommunications network throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I appreciate Senator Hill's comments as well as Senator Kane's. Deploying 5G throughout the state of Pennsylvania, number one, needs to be done responsibly. And number two, this is not the panacea for the problems we experienced during the pandemic. The only thing that's going to fix that is a years or decades long process of focusing with these same employers who are entering the wireless market, many of whom are also our local incumbent exchange carriers and have been for over 50 years. So we need to make sure that as we're deploying this, it is deployed strategically with the interest of the residents and the businesses and the consumers and the neighbors across the Commonwealth in mind, not the exclusive interest of the providers who intend to deploy these services across the Commonwealth. You can see in my comments, other states have gone before us, many other states. We believe we will have the benefit of hindsight to work on a bill that eliminates the problems many of these other states have encountered by moving too quickly to pass this legislation. The other concern that we have in the CWA is there is a pending decision on the FCC ruling from the last session of the state legislature, which could be reversed on appeal to the Supreme Court, or upon second look from the current FCC could be reversed. I believe all of you have seen what happened last week when they found out that over 7 million comments to the FCC on net neutrality were found to be fraudulent, right? Many of them were generated by one individual at the encouragement of the industry. So we need this legislature, as well as myself and others, to begin working on a process that makes this bill in Pennsylvania to deploy 5G across the Commonwealth the most responsible, and that we learn from the mistakes that other states have made, not continuing to perpetuate them. The rest of those issues of safety issues and other gaps in who has access and affordability issues are in my testimony. The digital divide, this does not solve that. In fact, in some cases, if we're not conscious of how it is deployed, it can exacerbate the digital divide across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. These new services that are being deployed are not going to be cheaper for the consumers. They're going to be enhanced services. And we still need to focus on holding these providers accountable in many cases at providing internet access at its basic level, which many of us have been used to for decades, where there's still gaps in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So the rest of my comments and issues are in my testimony, and I will be here if any of you have any questions at the end. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Chris Anderson from the IBEW. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair Phillips-Hill, and thank you, Senator Kane, for hosting us today. Greetings to the other members of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee. My name is Chris Anderson, and I'm an international representative for the IBEW's 3rd District. The 3rd District encompasses Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, and we represent 40,000 members in Pennsylvania. Of that, roughly 8,000 members work in the electric utility and telecommunications field. With that said, we understand the tremendous opportunities and challenges that are created with the deployment of any new technology, such as 5G technologies. With so many members who work in and around the facilities in which the new equipment will be installed, we feel it is imperative to be done in an order that protects the interests of the workers and the community. This technology is in high demand, so we must partner together to ensure it is done properly so that a reliable service can be delivered to the consumers as soon as possible. The IBEW remains a committed partner in the deployment of this technology, and we have worked with our counterparts from the CWA to address the concerns of all workers in these areas. Our proposed amendments are meant to clarify the needs of the workforce while maintaining the integrity of the legislation. Our members see daily how space is already at a premium on most utility poles throughout the state. Most of the proposed facilities will be installed within the OSHA recommended minimum approach distance to energized conductors, which is 10 feet. We feel it is of the utmost importance to underscore the need for this equipment to not expand its footprint any further than necessary, and that it is done to protect the worker safety as well as the public safety. Also, we must see that the facility owners are held to the same standards as other utility providers in the state by requiring them to inspect and maintain any equipment that is installed. These are the very same requirements that all other utility providers in the state must abide by. We have seen in many instances where there are double and triple poles left in locations where providers have failed to complete jobs. Work done in such a manner creates hazardous conditions for the public once the utility crews leave the work site. It is imperative that we maintain order in these already crowded spaces. It is our opinion that the easiest way to accomplish these goals and to efficiently deliver this technology is by holding contractors and developers to the same standards that the PUC requires of all utility providers. Utilizing responsible contractors can help us protect our collective interests while obtaining our goals. As consumers, we recognize the necessity to have this work done in a professional manner, and we feel it is in the public's interest to do so as well. We realize the tremendous opportunity that is before us, but we feel all of this cannot be done at the expense of the Pennsylvania citizens who have borne the cost of building and maintaining the utility rights-of-ways. We welcome the opportunity to broaden the access to more reliable wireless service while creating employment opportunities for Pennsylvanians. The IBEW stands ready with training centers equipped with the latest technologies and work practices and the highest skilled workforce to assist in these efforts. We are prepared to be the ones who perform these jobs delivering this new technology. We've approached this in a very finite manner with respect to all the collective hard work that has been already done by all interested parties. We've included a copy of our proposed amendments, and we recognize the need to act expeditiously and welcome the further dialogue. We are eager to join in the efforts on the deployment of this technology. We appreciate your time and consideration for our comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that any of you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Mooney and Mr. Anderson. Can you tell me, have you and your organizations had meetings or calls with the wireless carriers and the municipal groups to address your organization's concerns for any iteration of this proposed legislation?
So I'll answer that. Senator, we in the CWA have worked with not only the municipalities in the last session, but we've also worked collectively, us and the IBW, in meeting with the House of Representatives in the last session who proposed this. And as I mentioned earlier, I spoke to Senator Brown's office in the last session where he confirmed for me that what he was looking for was a bill that addressed these issues comprehensively, not something that was done in a slipshod fashion and overriding the rights and the requirements of the municipalities, as was presented in the previous session that other states have gone ahead and approved this work already. So we have been working with the municipalities, the employers. I know we sat down with AT&T last time around. Verizon, I don't believe we actually had a face-to-face meeting, but a former representative of mine, Alex Minishak, spoke to Verizon's representative on numerous occasions.
Very good. Mr. Mooney, did the CWA commit to providing any draft language? We just received draft language from IBEW. Have you committed to providing any type of draft language?
We did not yet, but we can. And also you will see that some of the language, both the CWA and the IBEW worked on, so without seeing it, I will confirm with Chris, but it may be that we agree with most of which he submitted.
You've not submitted any language to the carriers, the municipalities, the prime sponsor of the legislation with your concerns?
Senator Brown?
Correct.
The last conversation I had with Senator Brown was in the last session, and we haven't had a conversation with him in this session. In fact, the first correspondence we received was that you were requesting to move the bill and your previous hearing that you scheduled, which unfortunately we couldn't make. So we have not offered anything. And in fact, we were working on the House side As you know, prior to your first hearing being scheduled, there was a hearing scheduled in the House for May 25th or 26th, I believe. So when we were then contacted by the Senate, we believe you guys were working on the same time frame, and your time frame came a lot sooner.
Did the carriers submit any language to either the CWA or the IBEW, and have you respond to that language?
Senator Phillips-Hill, the language that we had received came from the House Consumer Affairs Committee. So we were using that as the baseline language that we had worked off of. Like I said, we understood all of the hard work that had gone into the legislation, so we tried to keep the main piece of legislation intact. We certainly didn't want to step on anyone's toes in that regard.
And we haven't, CWA, we haven't spoken to a provider this session.
Very good. Mr. Mooney, you say in your testimony that expanding access is, and I quote this from your testimony, a giveaway to large wireless companies. And as you may know, the municipalities have signed off on the language in the Senate bill. They've even gone so far as to say that the language must stay as is, based on their testimony 2 weeks ago, due to a lengthy negotiation process that they've engaged in. So if our local municipalities agree on this language, wouldn't you agree that we actually are not just giving everything to the wireless carriers? And that this is actually a formally negotiated product that has had a lot of input from various stakeholders.
So in the previous session, when we worked with the municipalities, they were not in support of this. Whatever transpired between now and then, we weren't informed of. But if you read what the language in this bill and what is in the FCC ruling, in fact, if the FCC ruling is upheld, they will still be at a disadvantage based on the language in this bill, we believe. And there were other municipalities, Senator, that negotiated their own agreements, which obviously it was successful, because if you watched any of the commercials recently for these providers, they are all running commercials that they have a nationwide network covering the nation from end to end, including the state of Pennsylvania. If you look at their advertising, none of them say we haven't been able to build in Pennsylvania because the bill isn't passed.
We will certainly take a look at that. As you may know, I sit on the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. There has been a pause in the work that the committee is doing with the change in presidential administrations, and we are waiting for further direction as to how the committee will proceed. But I thought it was really interesting that Chairman Rosenworcel has said that the FCC must update infrastructure policy to encourage investment in 5G networks, and further stated that if we want broad economic growth and widespread mobile opportunity, that we need to avoid unnecessary delays in the state and local approval process. And further went on to say that that is because they can slow down deployment. I think that's a pretty key statement on where the new leadership at the FCC sees 5G going. Now, if I may ask, if Pennsylvania is not able to streamline the deployment of small cells this spring, won't CWA and IBEW and their workers be negatively impacted by the potential loss of additional jobs, as well as man-hours that could arise as a result?
So I don't want to speak for the CWA, but where we are deploying the 5G cells, as I said, where they've been able to negotiate municipal agreements, obviously we are performing that work, actually jointly between us and the IBEW in many cases. We perform some function and an IBEW representative member employs another. But what we're looking at is the largest swath of that where they're deploying them But the other thing is, we don't believe their commercials, which say they're covering the whole Commonwealth. We believe they're concentrating in the densely populated areas, again, where they deployed previous versions of services. And as a result of that, we don't know where we're going to lose hours. If we can come up with a process here and out of this, it helps that'll be wonderful. But we believe the issues we've raised today and the concerns that we've presented in the last session need to be included in that for this to be successful.
And I certainly want to see more people working. When I look at the statistics, I see that the city of Columbus, Ohio, the city alone has deployed 10 times the number of small cells than the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That to me says we are missing out on a huge opportunity for connectivity as well as for the workers who have the job of doing the installation. Now, if I may, Mr. Mooney, my understanding is that the CWA did not oppose this bill in Delaware, and Mr. Anderson, the IBEW is actually supporting similar legislation in New Jersey. Can you share with me an explanation of what is different about small cell legislation and small cells in Delaware and New Jersey versus Pennsylvania?
Sure, Senator, I'd be happy to. I can speak for the IBEW in New Jersey. Verizon has made commitments to the workforce by way of ensuring that we represent roughly 1,000 workers with Local 827, and they've made commitments that the members of 827 would be performing certain tasks, and as well as any of the contractors who work on those projects that are not in-house employees with Verizon will be paid at prevailing wage, as is all utility work done in New Jersey. If those are conversations that the General Assembly and Verizon would like to have, the IBEW would certainly support any efforts in those.
And Senator, and I am responsible for the state of Delaware, where we didn't oppose it in the state of Delaware. Previously, Delaware had given the carriers complete deregulation of their telecommunications networks in the state, and it yielded zero investment from the primary carrier there, which was Verizon. As you are well aware, Delaware has a habit, and they are the largest incorporation state. So very rarely do they uphold any of that anyway. Delaware is a very small swath of that. I believe the city of Wilmington had already agreed with the carriers to have them deployed, as did Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, which obviously is a much larger footprint. But also to your point of won't the carriers be hiring more people in states like Delaware and even Virginia, which I'm responsible for, where they had the ability to deploy these small cells. They have chosen to use subcontractors to do it, where there wasn't a union contract in place to have our members do it. So it's perpetuating more workers coming in from other states who are not familiar with the areas they're working in, and brings us back to the safety concern that we have. But, and again, Senator, I want you to understand something. We haven't been opposed to this legislation. We're trying to give you our input about where we believe the legislation can be improved, right? We're not saying we're opposing it. We want to make sure that when they're doing this, you should be aware of this. I would love to see the numbers you referenced from Columbus, Ohio to the state of Pennsylvania, because we asked Senator Brown last session if he could get a mapping of where these services are deployed throughout the Commonwealth, so we could see where they were having the problem getting access to deploy these cell sites. So if you have it, it would be great if you guys could share it with us, because maybe that will refute our issue there.
I would certainly be happy to share any information that our office has with regard to the deployment of small cells with you, Mr. Mooney. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Chairman Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple questions. Mr. Mooney, the 5G small cell deployment bill is based on standards developed by the FCC from the prior administration. Have you heard that the Biden administration's FCC will revise the 5G cell deployment guidance?
So there is conversation out there that some of that may be in light of the other issues that the senator previously spoke about. The senator seems to be aware, Senator Hill seems to be aware of some conflicting information there. Our information is they want to look at it based on what's happening in the proposal in the infrastructure bill. They want to make sure that they're directing funds in the deployment of the infrastructure to areas of the nation where we have no service whatsoever, rather than perpetuating, overbuilding more advanced services where good service already exists. That's our understanding. Obviously, Senator Hill just gave a different opinion of that. I believe she could speak for herself.
Thank you. Also, in your testimony, you state that this bill will increase the current digital divide. I don't want to increase the digital divide. I want to help unserved and underserved areas of the Commonwealth get access to broadband and 5G. What changes can we make to the bill to ensure that Pennsylvania gets access to broadband and 5G?
So we had discussed in the previous session, putting a condition on there that deployment of 5G cells, there would be a requirement of a certain percentage to be deployed in areas that were underserved or unserved. But even with that, it requires them to build fiber out to those areas where we don't believe they have it today. To allow them to continue to build this in areas, for instance, I benefit from this. Senator Saval is my senator. I live in South Philadelphia. I have access to every service under the sun from either Verizon, Comcast, or any number of wireless carriers. So to go and build again in my neighborhood a 5G site, which they are doing, to give me even more enhanced services before constituents across Route 80 or in Scranton or Wilkes-Barre get even what we would consider viable internet service, in my opinion, is, compounding the problem, not solving it. The second phase of this is, if no one is, I don't even believe the providers are saying that 5G is going to be cheaper than the services that are there. In Philadelphia, we've seen with the pandemic, even in areas of the city where they have access to broadband that would allow them to do their schoolwork from home, the financial situation is such that they can't afford it, right? So there needs to be, and if we look at this industry has been given over the decades, hundreds of millions of dollars to make these services available evenly across the Commonwealth, and it simply hasn't happened. So to Senator Hill's opening statement about this is just one aspect, we hope it is. We're hoping to improve this one aspect, but that also we sit down with these providers and figure out a way that we can deploy the latest technology to the areas that don't have it and haven't had it since these employers were given deregulation in the Commonwealth from back in 1991. We're still suffering in those areas because of a lack of commitment and follow through from the deregulation bill in 1991, which is commonly referred to as Chapter 30.
Thank you. And how many people do you represent in the telecommunication and the wireless companies in the state of Pennsylvania? Would you know that number?
About 9,600, I believe, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
The other concern, Senator, with these wireless carriers, because the work can be done elsewhere, many of them don't have any of the call center functions or what we would refer to as the backroom functions located here in the state of Pennsylvania, because they have chosen to either remove them over time, or they just have the ability not to locate them here. We hope the legislature will take a look at that. Speaking of growing jobs, the building of the network is the front end of it. All the hours, the man and women hours to build these networks out is one thing, but then the residual work that comes behind that also needs to be looked at and figure out how the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania gets its fair share of that residual work for the customer base that we're giving these employers access to.
Thank you, Ed. I do have a couple questions for Mr. Anderson also. So, Chris, workers of public safety is very important. Paragraph 3 of your testimony states that the 5G small cell deployment bill should include language requiring the use of OSHA minimum distance requirements of 10 feet for energized conductors. Could you please explain in more detail how this OSHA standard protects utility workers, contractors, and also the public?
Thank you, Senator Kane. Unfortunately, I don't think it's feasible to maintain 10 feet distance from energized conductors on the utility poles. A lot of these poles are already tight quarters to begin with, but we feel that it is imperative that if they're going to be within that minimum approach distance, that it is a qualified worker who is cleared by OSHA to be within that minimum approach distance. That's done obviously for the worker safety, but for the public safety as well. You know, we take that very seriously. We understand the hazards that can be created whenever there are untrained individuals being within the minimum approach distance.
Thank you. And also, Chris, in your testimony, you mentioned the importance of responsible contractors. What are responsible contractors, and how does using responsible contractors improve 5G deployment for wireless companies, wireless consumers, and public safety?
Sure. So, you know, our thought process on that was to have folks who are good players doing this work. We understand that this is very important technology. A lot of people are relying on it. We want to see that the folks who are performing this work are doing so with the consumer's interest at hand. We have seen in many instances where there are some contractors and developers who come in, may do some subpar work, and they leave hazardous conditions behind. And this is after, you know, they've collected their paychecks. So obviously, I don't believe that they care what the quality of work looks like after they're gone. We want folks doing this work and doing it with Pennsylvanians' interests at hand.
Thank you, and I do have one follow-up. Mr. Anderson, you have recommended some language changes to the 5G small cell bill. One of the changes would limit new utility pole height to 50 feet above ground level. Could you please tell the committee why it's important to keep 5G small cell utility poles to a maximum height of 50 feet?
Well, in many areas, we're already facing height requirements for utility poles. You know, a standard utility pole has to have 10% of its overall height underground. So that leads us to believe that a 50-foot pole would be 43 feet out of the ground. Requiring that, we believe, limits any intrusion onto high energized conductors, and anything above 50 feet would be the high transmission voltages, and we certainly don't want to be any closer to them than we have to be.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Chairman Kane. Senator Dash.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank both of you gentlemen for presenting your testimony today. Mr. Mooney, you said something that actually struck a chord with me. I'm familiar how money walks. We just saw it down in western Pennsylvania with the construction jobs that we lost in the Pittsburgh area. You brought up about the back-end workers on these industries. What has motivated these companies to move those workers and those employees out of state?
Senator, you'll have to ask them what motivated them. I don't know what the motivation for them would be, but our interest, I believe the opportunity they're taking is because as this industry becomes more deregulated, they don't have the obligations to the areas anymore. Right? On the regulated side of the business, because they have to go before the Public Utilities Commission and others, they seem to pay more attention to that. Again, this is just my observation. You'll have to ask them what motivates them. But my observation is when they have to go before the agencies in the Commonwealth to justify what they're doing here from time to time, that also keeps them here. So,
well, I'm just kind of curious. What do you think that we could do that would help motivate to bring those jobs back, is what I'm saying.
Well, as we work through this, we can get them to commit in this legislation and other legislation like it, that if we're doing what they're asking us to do to modify the regulations in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I believe the least they could do is return that commitment to the Commonwealth by employing people here in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. In your written testimony, you said for proof of the financial burden, we only need to look at the experience of localities in dealing with the forms of preemption already in place. In a survey of 48 local governments across the country, 40% of localities reported that preemption has resulted in a loss of revenue, including 56% of large localities. Just curious, who conducted that and how that determination was made? How did they end up losing money?
So I don't know who conducted it. That information comes to me from our research department, but the way they're losing money is by, number one, the fees are being capped, right? What they can charge. And also they're losing money because they're being required to hire additional employees to expedite the process. Also, further in my testimony, you see some of the safety problems that have arisen, which can be attributed to the expediting of these processes. You know, this is not something, when you go into out into the field, remember, we have lots of underground utilities that are in the same space that we're in, and you see one of the tragedies that happen in here. In Pennsylvania, we have this process, call before you dig. And if everything's being expedited, you can bet your bottom dollar somebody's going to expedite that process as well. And we're going to have people that say, I don't have time to call before I dig because I got to get this done. And we're going to end up with more problems like that.
Well, let's hope they're not going on to the job site before making the call. You also said about increasing the digital divide, the way this bill was written. How do you propose that this bill does that?
Well, when you overbuild these services as I said, I live in Philadelphia, so I already have access to high-speed internet up to a gig. So now I'm going to get 5G. While we still have areas of the Commonwealth who don't have even a remote resemblance of what you and I would consider viable internet service. So these employers are focusing on the next generation without ever deploying the last generation to the largest swath of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that was what I referred to as Senator Hill. We've been asking to see if we could get some mapping. We used to have updated, pretty close to real-time mapping throughout the Commonwealth of where services were available. And maybe the commissioners from the Public Utilities Commission can address that at some point, but we no longer get it. And we believe it's due to the number of entrants into this industry over the last couple of decades as it's expanding and changing. It's no longer obviously a monopoly, but it goes well beyond the incumbent local exchange carriers and the other competitors that even at some point didn't want to provide it because of competitive disadvantages they claim. But I think if we're going to address this issue now where we see what can happen when our children have to go home to go to school, when our businesses have to send their workers home, if we don't have an even-handed approach to the deployment of this stuff, we're going to have people who can't do that. And hopefully we don't have any more crises like we've had with the pandemic, but it's still, as the president has said, you know, this has now become a vital aspect of everyday life in our homes, right? Where before people would say, well, grandmom doesn't need it. Now grandmom needs it to go to a doctor's visit, right? And now many schools, even my son went to high school in Philadelphia several years ago, was able to come home and do all of his homework on a computer from both school, you know, from school, from my house, from his mother's house, and both of his grandparents' houses in Philadelphia. I would bet you if you try to pull off that scenario in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, or anywhere across central Pennsylvania, you won't find that child being able to do it in one, let alone 5.
Well,
That's
actually,
where we have to make that.
I actually represent a large part of that. In fact, I'm one of 50 members, but I have one out of every 7 square miles of the Commonwealth in my district, 7 full counties and part of another. And I am keenly aware of the internet deserts that we have, even in the middle of these lush forests. I appreciate the testimony. I would appreciate it if you could send along from your research department the information that you referred to with regard to that survey and how they conducted it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. I want to thank both Mr. Mooney and Mr. Anderson for your testimony here today, and would like to move on to our second panel. And I would like to welcome the members of our second panel, including Ms. Sherry Collins, who is the Senior Director of Corporate Relations at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, and Chairman Gladys Brown Dutrell of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. And thank you both for being here today. And when you're ready, please proceed, and questions from members will follow at the conclusion of your panel.
Great. Good morning, Senator Phillips-Hill. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's always nice to see you. I want to thank you and Chairman Kane and honorable members of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee for allowing me to be here this morning. I really appreciate the work that you have done over the last several years, Chairwoman Phillips-Hill. I know that this is an issue that is extremely important to you, and I want to thank you and applaud you for your efforts. I am Sherry Collins, and I am currently serving as the Senior Director for the Office of Corporate Relations at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. And while my work at DCED is varied, I remain the point of contact for the department, on broadband-related matters, working closely with the Governor's Office and other agencies as we seek to address the ongoing challenges associated with the lack of a robust, affordable broadband infrastructure in Pennsylvania. Let me assure you that this remains a top priority for this administration. And as we all know, this is one of the most important issues of our time. COVID-19 certainly proved what a number of us across Pennsylvania, including members of this committee, have known for years. We have a serious last mile issue in Pennsylvania, and one that should be addressed as we continue to move forward and make Pennsylvania competitive. While we have a long way to go, we have made some good, solid progress over the years, utilizing programs such as the Appalachian Regional Commission's Power Program, expanding our list of strategic partners, and utilizing the services of Penn State Extension. I want to thank Chairwoman Dutrell for her work on this effort, and also that of Joseph Whitmer from her office. I think it should be recognized this morning that we have had service providers who have stepped to the plate to expand their infrastructure and services, especially over the last year. And the department recently launched a new program in conjunction with the Governor's Office and, of course, the Senate. It is known as the Unserved High-Speed Broadband Funding Program. The guidelines for this new program, which just recently launched, can be found on DCED's website at dced.pa.gov. The application period is open from June 1st, 2021 to September 24th, pardon me. This $5 million program will run through the department in conjunction with the Commonwealth Financing Authority. As I have noted in the past, DCED remains neutral on the deployment of 5G. We recognize this technology plays a critical role in our densely populated urban environments and is important as we seek to continue to support Pennsylvania's innovation economy. And as noted by industry experts, it is imperative that we recognize that 5G will not solve the rural broadband issues in Pennsylvania, where homes and businesses sit miles away from one another or from the main road, where the dead end typically remains. Our last mile connectivity remains to be a challenge here in Pennsylvania, and until we solve that issue, we will have a significant number of Pennsylvanians without access to high-speed internet services. Again, I wanted my comments today to be brief, but I absolutely thank you for allowing me to participate in today's hearing and applaud this committee for continuing to tackle this issue head on. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Ms. Collins, and welcome Chairman Brown Dutrell.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Gladys Dutrell. I am the chair of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, and with me today is my legal counsel on telecom issues, Joseph Whitmer. So I asked him to please pull up his camera. We do appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about 5G and the legislation that the Senate is proposing. I appreciate your recognition that having ubiquitous and ready access to fixed and mobile broadband networks and services for consumers for employment, education, healthcare, and other purposes has become, we know it's become even more important, especially in light of this pandemic. And I know you have heard many comments of that effect from others that have testified before me. The pandemic has highlighted why the Federal Communications Commission and other stakeholders concluded that a majority of Americans lack access to broadband service. Without this access, it's very difficult for them. A corollary to this conclusion is a recognition that mobile broadband has not yet become a viable substitute for fixed broadband, and affordability is the main obstacle to adoption. So today's hearing is, we know it's focused on the committee's concern regarding acceleration and deployment of wireless network infrastructure that's critical to offering 5G mobile broadband here in Pennsylvania. And it is clear that 5G wireless networks are advanced networks that play a critical role in the next generation of mobile broadband. However, what's not always clear to the public is that the Public Utility Commission and its role that we have when it comes to wireless networks like 5G and mobile networks and services. So my comments today will really talk about our jurisdiction. The commission has very limited jurisdiction, and I know people hate to hear us say that, but we also want to be very cognizant and respectful of the legislation that has been passed by the General Assembly. I've worked on it since 1993, and then also in 2004 when I was a staffer in the Senate in the Democratic caucus. So I'm very aware in terms of what the legislative intent was in terms of broadband. And when I say that we have very limited jurisdiction, it's really respectful of the legislation that the General Assembly has passed. So that Section 102 states that the Commission does not have jurisdiction over wireless providers that are not otherwise a public utility for voice service, and that includes 5G wireless networks and providers. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently ruled in the Crown Castle case that the Commission does have jurisdiction, though, over the distributed antenna service or DAS providers. So this is an important component of the Commission's jurisdiction because many 5G wireless providers may increasingly rely on DAS networks to provide services. DAS providers will assist wireless carriers to deploy 5G wireless services through their networks by providing the infrastructure needed for the provision of 5G service. However, it must be emphasized that these DAS providers are not directly offering a retail wireless service to the public at large. A DAS provider is delivering a wholesale telecommunications service to the public for a fee, and the public, which consists of other companies, not just retail customers like you and I. In its Crown Castle decision, the Supreme Court acknowledged this key fact and ruled that the Commission's jurisdiction is not confined simply to regulating utility service provided to retail customers only, but also encompasses utility services provided to carrier customers too. Additionally, the Commission exercises jurisdiction over a wireless carrier that seeks to become an eligible telecommunications carrier, or ETCs, under federal law. Wireless providers seek ETC designation so that they can obtain federal universal service high-cost funding from the FCC to deploy and provide mobile voice and broadband service to eligible consumers. Wireless carriers can also seek to become lifetime-only ETCs, and this allows eligible consumers to receive a $7.95 a month amount to buy voice and mobile broadband services. Outside of these instances, that Section 102 has no provision given the Commission jurisdiction over mobile broadband networks or services such as those that might arise for 5G purposes. This means that the Commission currently exercises very limited jurisdiction over wireless networks or services. Indeed, the Commission has also very limited jurisdiction over broadband network and services as well. So Chapter 30 addresses the Commission's jurisdiction over wireline broadband network services. Chapter 30 imposes on incumbent local exchange carriers, or ILECs, the obligation to make broadband available within 10 days of a customer's request. That obligation makes ILECs, usually the telephone company, to the public, the only provider that is legally required to make broadband available to customers, but only at Chapter 30 speeds. And these speeds are 0.128 megabits up and 1.5 megabits down. Unfortunately, we know that these Chapter 30 speeds have appeared to be overtaken by recent technology and also consumer expectations and federal policies. We talk about today's speed as Netflix speed. So as the Commission does not exercise jurisdiction over wireless carriers except in those limited jurisdictions that I described, the Chapter 30 obligation does not extend to mobile broadband service, let alone the new 5G service. So the preceding discussion regarding the scope and breadth of the Commission's jurisdiction was necessary. I really believe it's necessary to clarify our jurisdiction, but also to indicate that it remains an important consideration given the real possibility that disputes may arise from public utilities seeking to gain access to the public rights of way or the placement of equipment attachments on municipalities' utility poles. I would also like to note that the FCC's jurisdiction over pole attachments does not encompass municipal entities. So the Commission's recently exercised jurisdiction over pole attachments also would not extend to municipal right-of-ways. The aim to provide greater legal certainty and clarity on the rules in Pennsylvania regarding 5G networks and services is a goal that will greatly benefit Pennsylvanians. So I leave my testimony as that, but I will say that the PUC has been open and available to the General Assembly to serve as a resource for information that we do have. We time and time again have testified. Even before I became a commissioner, I've seen the commission come over and testify. And when I came on to the commission, we constantly emphasized to provide that clarity where our jurisdiction lies. It's still important for us as a commission for consumers to have access to broadband, but we also want to be very clear in terms of where our jurisdiction lies. So I do thank you for that opportunity to testify. Joe and I are here to answer any questions. He's better at the technical part of it, but we are definitely here to answer any questions you have of us.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Chairman Kane to begin our series of questions. Chairman Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairwoman Brown and Ms. Collins for testifying today. But I do have a question for Chairwoman Brown. In your testimony, you mentioned that wireless providers can apply to become eligible telecommunication carriers. Seems like this is a two-part question here. So, have any wireless providers in Pennsylvania applied to become eligible telecommunication carriers? And if no, or if only a few wireless providers have applied for the ETC designation, can you please explain, in your opinion, why more companies have not applied for the ETC designation?
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. I'm going to let Joe Whitmer from my office answer in terms of the number of ELECs or ILECs that may have applied for ETC designation. So I do not have that answer.
Hi, I'm Joe Whitmer. I'm legal counsel to Chairman Brown. The wireline carriers, the local phone companies, are required to provide Lifeline as a condition of getting federal cost support for their high-cost networks to support their networks. So they all provide that as a condition of getting that federal support. The wireless carriers do not get high-cost federal support to build their networks. So they apply to be Lifeline-only ETCs. The Commission's prepared a brochure to educate the public about the Lifeline program, and at the end of that brochure, we've listed all of the wireless ETCs who are Lifeline only. That is, they only provide Lifeline. There are about 14 of them. Some of them include Blue Jay, T-Mobile, TracFone, Virgin Mobile, Yourtel, Sage Communications, Allright, Buffalo Lake Erie, and even Viasat, a satellite company, because they had to get that ETC designation in order to receive federal funding as a result of the recent auction. So there are about 14 wireless-only ETCs in Pennsylvania, and the Commission has granted them the designation when they've asked for it.
Thank you. And also, Chairwoman Brown, what would be the consumer's benefit if wireless companies applied to become eligible telecommunication carriers? Or does Joe want to handle that also? It's your call.
Well, you mean under ETC designation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Joe was answering that in part of his when he was giving part of that answer. Joe, you want to repeat that?
And for Ms. Collins, I asked this question earlier, so you may be able to answer this one too, but I just want to throw it out there. I want Pennsylvania to eliminate the current digital divide. I don't want to increase the digital divide. I want to help underserved areas of the Commonwealth get access to broadband and 5G. What changes can we make to the 5G small cell deployment bill to ensure that all Pennsylvanians get access to broadband and 5G?
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for that question. I think at this point in time, the Department of Community and Economic Development really remains neutral on the deployment of 5G. I think that, we support the advancement of multiple technologies that will help to close the digital divide, not just one versus another. And so without having seen the newly proposed legislation, and please forgive me, I don't think that it has been introduced at this point. At least I have not seen it come across my desk for comments. So I don't necessarily think it would be appropriate for me to comment on that this morning, having not seen it. But I think in order to close the digital divide, we need to work together to identify solutions that will work in the various parts of our Commonwealth, recognizing that in urban environments, it may work very well, whereas in rural environments, your typical fiber to the home or fiber to the presence or fiber to the premise would certainly work better than a 5G technology would. And so I think that there are a number of things that we need to continue to evaluate and take into consideration as we attempt to close this digital divide.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Chairman Kane. Senator Stefano.
Thank you, Chairman. Real quick question for PUC Chair Dutriell. Real quick, I know we're running out of time. In working with the broadband expansion, whether it be 5G or any of the other expansion technologies, I've heard time and time again as we get into unserved areas, fiber has to be strung, whether it be to get to a node for 5G, but the fiber needs to be strung along poles as they get out into those areas. And the issue of pole make ready has become a real problem. And it comes back to the PUC and their utilities that have asked for rate increases to do pole maintenance, but the pole maintenances are not being done. What part of your department would oversee that type of maintenance that was requested and never finished? Because it is affecting the private-public partnerships of this expansion.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. It's definitely something that I don't know that we have heard a lot about, but it's definitely something I think will fall under our jurisdiction in terms of tariff filings that the companies have filed and infrastructure that they have put in place or have requested to be reimbursed for. So that's definitely something we can get back to you on in more detail. At this point, I don't have all that information for you.
I would look forward to that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Stefano. And Chairman Dutrell, I really appreciate your closing statement in your testimony about the aim being to provide greater legal certainty and clarity on the rules in Pennsylvania regarding 5G networks and services, and your belief that that goal is important for Pennsylvania. And Ms. Collins, truly appreciate the work that you have done in your tenure on this issue particularly, and the desire to not endorse one means of delivery for internet over another, and just creating an environment where they can all flourish. And I shared earlier with Mr. Mooney in our Q&A that Chairman Rosenworcel at the FCC has said that the FCC has to update their infrastructure policy to encourage investment in 5G networks, and further stated that if we want broad economic growth and widespread mobile opportunity, that we need to avoid unnecessary delays in the state and local approval process, and that is because they can slow down deployment. And I think we are all in agreement. This pandemic has shown how vital connectivity is for every Pennsylvanian. And so you both have very unique vantage points on these issues. And while we are very constrained for time here this afternoon, hope that we will be able to continue the conversation to get your knowledge and your insight about how other states and other areas have, in fact, been able to address 5G technology, and hope that this is just the beginning of that conversation, and truly appreciate your testimony here today. And now I would like to recess the Senate Communications and Technology Committee until the call of the chair. Thank you.